They thought humiliating me was just a game, placing me by the trash can at my husband's birthday, pretending I didn't matter. His mother smirked, his sister whispered, and my husband lowered his eyes as if he didn't see. But I saw everything. I felt every sting, every cut of their laughter. What they never imagined was that I came prepared, carrying a weapon far more dangerous than anger. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I reached for the gift they thought would prove my devotion, and with a single move, I began rewriting the story they thought they controlled. I used to believe I'd already lived my greatest chapter. Years ago, I was the woman who signed contracts worth millions, who negotiated late into the night, who saw her face in magazines under the word visionary. Then I chose love. I closed that door, locked away the sharper version of myself, and became the wife who cooked, smiled, and let everyone else shine. Tonight was supposed to be proof that I had chosen well, my husband's birthday, a celebration of him and of us. I wanted the world to see what a perfect life we had built. The lights of the rented hall were golden, flattering every angle of my dress. Guests raised their glasses as the cameras rolled, and already I could see the comments racing across the live feed. Perfect couple. What a lucky man. She glows for him. I smiled, my hand wrapped around the stem of a champagne glass, my posture straight, everything rehearsed. The world would never know the effort it took to look effortless. My husband basked in it, laughing at every joke, his arm slung casually around my chair when he remembered I was there. His mother hovered near, pearls gleaming, lips curved in the kind of smile that never touched her eyes. To the crowd, she was gracious, warm. But when she leaned in, when the camera wasn't angled just so, I saw the frost in her expression. To her, I wasn't a partner. I was a placeholder, a necessary accessory for her son's perfect life. I kept my smile, even when she squeezed my shoulder just a little too hard. The comments online gushed about how radiant the family looked, how rare it was to see such harmony. They couldn't see the tension in my jaw, the way I gripped the napkin under the table. They didn't notice the quick glances between mother and son, silent messages passing above my head. The first crack came when the seating was announced. There was laughter, the scrape of chairs, and then her voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mia, dear, you don't mind sitting here, do you? Just by the side, more comfortable." The chair she indicated stood at the far edge of the table, tucked awkwardly near the service door. Beside it, a silver bin gleamed, half filled with discarded napkins and empty bottles. For a heartbeat, I thought I misheard. Surely no one would stage such an insult in public. But when I glanced around, I saw the amusement in her daughter's eyes, the quick smirk she tried to hide. My husband said nothing, only pulled out his own chair and began chatting with a cousin as if he hadn't noticed. The guests hesitated, their laughter faltering, then resumed as though nothing had happened. I walked slowly to the seat, every step feeling like a test. The cameras followed, the live stream unblinking. I lowered myself onto the chair, smoothing my dress as if nothing were wrong. But the stench of discarded food was sharp, and the humiliation seared deeper than I could hide. On screen, I was still the perfect wife, smiling politely. But in that moment, I felt stripped bare, positioned exactly where they believed I belonged. My champagne tasted bitter. Around me, conversations carried on, jokes flew, the music played. Yet I felt the weight of thousands of unseen eyes, all the strangers watching from their phones, believing they were witnessing a fairy tale. No one could see the trap behind the curtain. No one except me. I turned my face to the camera when the host announced the cake, when applause thundered and confetti fell. My lips curved as they were supposed to, but my eyes betrayed me. I looked directly into the lens, holding it steady, letting the silence between my breaths speak louder than any outburst ever could. For a moment, I imagined the comments slowing, viewers tilting their heads, sensing something beneath the glossy surface. Could they see it? Could they feel the shift? I didn't break character, not yet. But inside, the first embers of something long buried stirred. They thought they had placed me beside the trash. They had no idea they had placed me beside fire. And as the candlelight flickered across my face, I made a silent vow. This performance was almost over. The days that followed were quiet, at least on the surface. I played the role they expected of me, the silent wife who swallows humiliation and smiles through her pain. At breakfast, I poured coffee, listened to my husband talk about his business, and nodded as if I hadn't been paraded beside a trash bin in front of thousands of strangers. My mother-in-law watched me closely, testing for cracks. When none appeared, her smirk deepened. She thought she had put me in my place, but behind the facade, I worked. Each whisper, each cruel aside, I stored away. I left my phone recording when I entered the kitchen, when my sister-in-law muttered that I was nothing more than a charity case. At night, when the house was quiet, I ran the recordings through an AI program I had once invested in, software that could isolate tones, analyze intent, and extract clarity even from hushed conversations. It became my silent accomplice, turning venom into evidence. To the outside world, I was still Mia the agreeable. Livestream clips replayed me laughing lightly, handing my husband his drink, sitting gracefully at family dinners. Commenters called me composed, resilient, an example of poise. They didn't notice the way my eyes lingered too long or how I pressed my fingers together under the table as if keeping myself tethered. Yet a smaller fraction of viewers, the ones who watched too closely, began to sense it. "She's hiding something," one comment read. "Look at her eyes. She knows." They were right. I was waiting. The opportunity came sooner than expected. My husband's company was celebrating an expansion deal, and once again the cameras were invited, the family parading itself as the image of success. I arrived with a velvet box in hand, the same one I had carried on his birthday. Inside was no jewelry, no watch, but a contract, a certificate representing a substantial investment in his firm, one I had made months earlier in secret, believing in his potential before anyone else did. I was supposed to present it as a gesture of loyalty, proof that I stood behind him not just as a wife, but as a partner. That had been my original plan, back when I still believed we were on the same side. But after the humiliation, after the silence of the man I had given everything to, the gift became something else entirely. It became leverage. The evening sparkled with speeches, laughter, and the clink of glasses. Cameras moved like insects, capturing every angle. My husband spoke of his vision for the future, his voice confident, his mother glowing beside him. When it was my turn, he gestured for me to step forward, expecting a display of devotion to complement his triumph. I walked slowly to the stage, velvet box in hand. Applause filled the room, though I noticed the tightness in certain smiles, the wary gleam in my mother-in-law's eyes. She thought she knew what was coming. I smiled soft and practiced and said, this was meant to be my gift, a token of faith, a sign that I believed in us. I opened the box, revealing the contract inside, gold-stamped and irrefutable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My husband reached out instinctively, eager to grasp it, but I closed the box before he could touch it. Faith, I continued, my voice steady, is a fragile thing. It can be nurtured or it can be discarded, like waste. My eyes flicked toward my mother-in-law, and once broken, it cannot be given again. The room shifted. Conversation stilled. The camera zoomed in. I turned from my husband and carried the box back into the crowd, cradling it against my side as though it were a child. The silence was deafening. Then came the sound. Dozens of phones buzzing at once, notifications piling in as viewers flooded the live chat. Hashtags were born in seconds, racing to the top of feeds. One above all stood out, sharp as a blade. Trash can wife. It was meant as mockery, but I could feel it bending into something else. It was fire catching dry grass, spreading beyond control. What they had tried to bury, I was turning into a weapon. When I walked out of that hall, cameras trailing and eyes wide, I didn't feel weak. I felt the old pulse return, the heartbeat of the woman I had once been. They thought they had caged me. What they had really done was wake me. And this was only the beginning. The hashtag didn't die. It multiplied, fractured into debates, arguments, parodies, even fan edits of my quiet defiance. Half the internet praised me as a symbol of dignity. The other half mocked me as a bitter wife who couldn't take a joke. My husband's family tried desperately to wrestle the narrative back into their control. They posted polished videos of togetherness, staged dinners where everyone smiled too brightly, statements about how family matters should stay private. But their words only fanned the flames. I didn't rush. I let their lies pile higher, waiting for the weight to crush them. And then, at the perfect moment, I released the footage. Not the polished live stream, not the edited clips they circulated, but the raw truth, the sneers, the muttered insults, the subtle gestures of dismissal. Viewers saw what I had endured, the way I had been shoved to the corner, treated as less than human. The internet erupted. Some people wept in anger for me. Others raged that they had been fooled. The narrative was no longer theirs. It was mine. But what few realized, at least at first, was that the footage wasn't captured by chance. Every angle, every snippet of dialogue had been curated, spliced, and released with precision. Months earlier, I had begun staging certain moments, exaggerating my silence, leaving gaps for interpretation. It was a performance within a performance. I didn't just survive humiliation, I turned it into a script. The revelation struck like lightning across social feeds. Commentators dissected the clips frame by frame, uncovering the careful design, the way my gaze lingered at the camera as if daring them to look deeper. It's like a mini-drama, one popular influencer said. Every scene ends on a cliffhanger. They were right. What looked like weakness was choreography, but not everyone applauded. With every wave of support came accusations of manipulation, of deception. If she staged it, critics argued, doesn't that make her just as false as them? I read their words, absorbed their suspicion, and let it sharpen me. They had no idea how falsehood worked. My husband's family lived on lies. I was simply better at it. Still, for all my planning, I hadn't anticipated the shadows lurking beneath my own roof. The first hint came in the form of a file slipped anonymously into my inbox. Audio. I pressed play, expecting more of my mother-in-law's venom, perhaps a cousin's mockery. Instead, I heard voices that cut through me like glass. My husband's, my sister-in-law's. Their tones were low, conspiratorial. They spoke of inheritance, of shares, of protecting what's ours. I sat frozen as my husband's voice, calm, almost indifferent, filled the room. She was never part of the family, he said. She'll leave quietly once she realizes there's nothing for her here. The words landed heavier than any insult I had endured. My chest constricted, breath ragged. This wasn't the petty cruelty of a jealous mother-in-law. This was betrayal at the core, the man I had once trusted, conspiring with his own sister to erase me. I replayed the clip again and again, searching for hesitation, for regret in his voice. There was none, only certainty. The internet's roar dulled into background noise. All the trending hashtags, the millions of eyes, it all blurred compared to the sound of that single sentence. They hadn't just tried to humiliate me in public. They had plotted to strip me of everything behind closed doors. I thought back to the nights I had spent awake, waiting for him to come home, the sacrifices I had made, the parts of myself I had buried to fit into his world. And now I knew the truth. I had been living in their long con all along. But if they believed I would leave quietly, they had underestimated me yet again. I closed my laptop, the recording still echoing in my mind, and for the first time in years, I felt the old heat surge through me. Betrayal this deep didn't break me. It rewrote me, and I was ready to script the next act. The night I heard his voice on that recording, something inside me broke, and something else ignited. For hours I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering every sacrifice I had made for a man who had already decided I was disposable. My rage wasn't loud. It was silent, methodical, burning so hot it felt cold. By dawn, I knew exactly what I had to do. I called it the Phoenix Protocol. It wasn't a plan born in that single night. It was the culmination of months of quiet preparation, a contingency I had once designed only in theory. Now it became my lifeline. I began by liquidating the shares I still controlled, silent stakes my husband's family had conveniently forgotten about. With a few signatures, capital shifted. With a few calls, alliances formed. I reached out to the very competitors his family had mocked, offering them an opportunity they couldn't refuse. The moves were invisible at first, ripples beneath calm water, but when they surfaced, they struck like a storm. Within weeks, suppliers began pulling out, contracts were suddenly in dispute, and rumors swirled in the financial press. The empire my husband's family had paraded as untouchable trembled on its foundations. The internet, ever hungry for drama, devoured every headline. Clips of me from the birthday party resurfaced, overlaid with captions like, "She was planning it all along." They dissected my stillness, my smile beside the trash, and called it foreshadowing. "She played the long game," one commentator said. "That humiliation wasn't weakness, it was bait." And perhaps it was. Looking back, I realized every insult had only tightened the spring, making the release inevitable. Their cruelty hadn't broken me. It had given me narrative power. As the company faltered, the family's grip on the public image unraveled. My mother-in-law, once so regal, was caught on camera berating staff, her mask slipping. My sister-in-law tried to smear me online, but the screenshots of her own words turned into proof of malice. My husband, once the golden boy, stumbled through interviews, unable to explain the sudden collapse. Each of them became characters in a story they no longer controlled. The dominoes fell faster than I could have predicted. Investors fled. Competitors swooped in. Board members whispered about betrayal, but they all knew the truth. They had underestimated me. The woman they thought was ornamental had become the executioner. Still, victory didn't feel the way I had imagined. Alone in my apartment, I watched the news feeds, each headline another nail in the coffin of their empire. My phone lit with congratulations, with messages from strangers calling me an icon, a survivor. But in the quiet, when the screens dimmed, I felt only emptiness. No amount of destruction could patch the wound of betrayal. I had won, and yet I felt hollow. When the call came, I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar, though my chest tightened at the thought. Against my better judgment, I pressed accept. His face filled the screen, a man I once loved, now a stranger wrapped in desperation. He wasn't in his tailored suit or under stage lights. He was on the floor of his office, papers scattered like debris around him. His voice trembled as he spoke my name. "Mia, please." His eyes were red, his jaw slack with exhaustion. For once there was no arrogance, no calculation, only a man stripped bare. I said nothing. I let the silence hang between us, heavy as a sentence. He bowed his head, and when he lifted it again, the phone shook in his hands. He placed it down so the camera faced him fully. And then, before the entire audience of whoever might be watching, because of course he had gone live, he dropped to his knees. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "You were the best part of me. I see that now. Please, forgive me." The comments flooded instantly, hearts and shocked emojis flying across the screen, but I barely saw them. I stared at the man kneeling before me, the man who had once vowed to protect me, who had instead chosen silence and betrayal. He was broken now, pleading not just with me, but with the millions of strangers who had witnessed our downfall. And I felt no triumph, only the sharp edge of emptiness. because forgiveness was never the question. The question was whether there was anything left of me that could be given back. Power was supposed to taste sweet. That was what I told myself as the headlines praised me, as journalists dissected my strategy, as strangers sent me messages thanking me for proving that women didn't have to remain silent. My bank accounts overflowed. My name carried weight in boardrooms that had once dismissed me. I had become the storm they never saw coming. And yet, every night when I returned to my apartment, silence pressed in like a second skin. The city lights flickered outside my window, reflections glinting off champagne bottles and unopened gifts that littered the table. Victory looked a lot like loneliness. At first, I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, in expansion plans, in meetings that reminded me I had outmaneuvered every enemy. But as the days turned to weeks, the hollowness only deepened. I no longer woke with a sense of triumph. I woke with a question that gnawed at me. Who have I become? It was during one of those nights that an old friend reached out. Clara had been with me in the early days, back when I was building my first company, back when my laughter was unrestrained and my eyes didn't carry shadows. She invited me to meet, and though I resisted, curiosity won. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the kind that smelled of roasted beans and old wood, far removed from the glittering halls I had grown accustomed to. Clara studied me quietly before she spoke. "Mia," she said gently, "you won. You crushed them. But tell me honestly, what's left of you now?" The words struck harder than any insult my in-laws had ever thrown. I opened my mouth, ready with the practiced lines of strength and independence, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, and for a moment I thought I might break in public. I forced a smile, but Clara didn't let me hide. She leaned closer. "You used to build, Mia. You used to dream. Now all you do is destroy. Look at yourself. Are you any different from the people you swore you'd never become?" Her voice lingered in my mind long after I left. That night, staring at my reflection, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. My tailored suit, my flawless makeup, my cold eyes, they belonged to the enemy I once fought. Clara was right. I had become them. But the universe wasn't finished with me yet. The revelation arrived quietly, almost innocuously. A packet of documents slid under my door, no sender listed. I opened it cautiously, and inside were contracts, emails, financial trails. My stomach knotted as I read. The connections were undeniable. The mastermind who had whispered into my mother-in-law's ear, who had planted seeds of suspicion and fueled their cruelty, wasn't family at all. It was Adrian Cole. Years ago, Adrian had been a potential partner, brilliant, ruthless, ambitious. He had proposed a merger when my company was on the rise, and though tempted, I had refused. I wanted independence. I wanted to prove I could stand without leaning on a man whose methods reeked of manipulation. I hadn't thought of him in years, but now the evidence told me the truth. Adrian had never forgiven me. Instead, he had maneuvered from the shadows, feeding my in-laws the poison they were so eager to drink. My marriage had been his chessboard, my humiliation, his entertainment. The betrayal cut in a new way. I had focused all my rage on my husband, his mother, his sister. And while they had been willing players, the architect had been Adrian all along. He had used them to reach me, to dismantle me, to prove that without him I was vulnerable. But he was wrong. As I pieced the puzzle together, fury surged. Not the cold, calculated anger that had fueled the Phoenix Protocol, but something deeper, hotter. Because now I saw the cruelest truth. I had never been merely a victim. I had been a pawn. Every move I made, every reaction I gave had been anticipated, nudged, exploited. I wasn't fighting a family anymore. I was fighting the man who had orchestrated my downfall from the very beginning. The realization left me shaken. I closed the file and sat in the dark, the city buzzing faintly outside. For a long moment, I felt the edges of despair creeping in, whispering that I had been nothing more than a piece on someone else's board. Then I heard his voice again, in memory. She was never part of the family. And I understood. They thought they had cast me aside. But Adrian had never understood one thing about me. I wasn't a piece to be played. I was the board itself. And if he wanted war, I would burn the game to ashes. When Adrian finally stepped into the light, it wasn't in a boardroom or a backroom negotiation. It was on a stage, streamed to millions, framed as a business summit, but engineered to be a spectacle. He stood tall, charming as ever, spinning a narrative where he was the savior who had come to stabilize chaos. My chaos. He smiled as if he had already won. I walked onto that stage knowing exactly what was at stake. Cameras swiveled, the audience hushed, hashtags exploded in real time. This was the final episode of a drama none of us had meant to write. Yet here we were, actors bound to finish the script. Adrian greeted me with false warmth. "Mia," he said, voice amplified, "you've proven you're formidable, but without structure, without guidance, fire burns everything down. Stand with me, and together we can turn destruction into empire." His words were honey-laced with poison, the same tone he had used years ago when he first offered partnership. Only this time I had already tasted the ruin he left in his wake. I took the microphone, steadying my breath. The lights were blinding, but I kept my gaze locked on him. "You built your empire on manipulation," I said evenly. "You pitted families against each other. You watched people burn for entertainment, but you made one mistake, Adrian. You thought I was playing your game." The crowd shifted, whispers echoing. Adrian's smile faltered. "You see," I continued, "I'm not here to win. I'm here to end it." Before he could react, I pulled out a folder. Contracts, deeds, bank transfers, every last shred of my remaining holdings. I placed them on the table between us. Gasps filled the hall. "I'm giving it all up," I said. "The money, the leverage, the very pieces you thought you could use against me. You can't move me anymore because I'm no longer on the board." Adrian's mask cracked, his calm veneer slipping into rage. "You're throwing everything away," he hissed, forgetting the cameras, forgetting the millions of eyes watching. "No," I answered softly, reaching for my hand. The ring still gleamed there, the symbol of everything I had endured. I twisted it off slowly, the sound of metal against skin louder than the applause. I laid it gently beside the contracts. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm setting myself free." The audience erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some gasped in disbelief. In that moment, it didn't matter, because for the first time in years, I felt light. I wasn't fighting for revenge, for justice, or for validation. I was simply stepping out of the darkness. I turned from the stage, leaving Adrian sputtering behind me, the camera still capturing his unraveling. My heels clicked against the floor, each step an exclamation mark. When the doors closed, the noise dimmed, and the world fell silent. Outside, the air was crisp. The city pulsed around me, indifferent yet alive. I breathed deeply, savoring the taste of freedom. I had sacrificed power, but in return, I had reclaimed myself. In the weeks that followed, I disappeared from the headlines. No more hashtags, no more viral clips. I rented a small studio apartment overlooking the river, started painting again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. I volunteered at a community center, taught young women how to pitch their ideas, how to recognize their worth before someone else tried to define it for them. I was no longer a wife, no longer a pawn in a family war, no longer a piece in Adrian's game. I was simply Mia, and in that simplicity, I found rebirth. One afternoon, as I walked through the crowded streets, the sunlight warm on my skin, I saw him. Not Adrian, him, my husband, or the man who had once been my husband. He stood across the street looking thinner, wearier, his eyes scanning until they found me. For a heartbeat, time folded in on itself. Our gazes locked. Neither of us moved. The noise of the city dulled, and for that single suspended moment, it was only us. The man who had betrayed me, the man who had once loved me, the man who had kneeled on camera begging for forgiveness. I didn't wave. I didn't run. I simply let the moment linger, then turned and walked away. Behind me, life continued. Horns blaring, people laughing, the hum of a city that never stopped. Ahead of me stretched a path I hadn't walked before, unmapped, unclaimed, mine alone. Whether he followed or not no longer mattered. The game was over, and I had transcended it.